What's happening, everybody? Justin, Bridgewater's Finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter, and welcome back to, as I mentioned before, our opening salvo in our coverage of the 2018 National Hockey League Stanley Cup Playoffs. These are our predictions for who's going to win the divisions and who's going to make the playoffs. We'll just give you a quick reminder of what we just went over in the previous video before we get into what we're going to talk about now. So in the previous video, we laid out what the playoff matchups would be if the season ended right now. As a reminder, in the East, you would have Tampa Bay as the number 1 Atlantic Division team taking on New Jersey as a wild card 2. And you'd have Boston as the number 2 seed in the Atlantic taking on the number 3 seed in the Atlantic, Toronto. Metropolitan number 1, you'd have the Washington Capitals taking on the top wildcard team, which would be the Columbus Blue Jackets. And in the 2 versus 3 matchup in the Met, you'd have Pittsburgh hosting Philadelphia. In the West, Nashville as the number 1 team in the Central, you would have them playing host to the wildcard 2 team, who are the Colorado Avalanche. And the 2 versus 3 in the Central would be Winnipeg hosting Minnesota. And in the Pacific Division, you get the Vegas Golden Knights playing host to the number 1 wildcard team, which right now is the Dallas Stars. And in the 2 versus 3 in the Pacific, you would have San Jose hosting Los Angeles. And basically, in the last video, I don't think the division leaders are going to differ from the ultimate division champions. I've got Tampa Bay winning the Atlantic. I've got Washington winning the Metropolitan. I've got Nashville winning the Central. And I've got Vegas, who basically have already clinched the Pacific Division. So those are your division champions, and they're in. But where do the rest of the dominoes fall? Also, stay tuned to the end of this video because I went through and I predicted every single game for the rest of the NHL season, which means I have final standings for everyone, which means I have a projected entry draft lottery order. And that's what we're going to do to close out the video. I'm going to give you what I project to be the draft lottery order heading into the draft lottery, heading into the 2018 NHL entry draft. So we started in the West last time. Let's go to the Eastern Conference. Let's start there, and we'll start in the Metropolitan Division, where we've already established we got the Washington Capitals who are winning the division. If you'll remember, I have Washington finishing with 104 points and 41 ROWs. But you'll also remember that I had Pittsburgh also finishing over 100 points. Therefore, I think they're the only team in this division that finishes over 100 points. So what we're going to do in the Metropolitan Division number 2, we're going to pencil the Pittsburgh Penguins in as the number 2 team in the Met. So who can we effectively eliminate? Who can we look at and say, you know what, there's no way these teams are coming back to challenge for a playoff spot? Obviously, the 2 New York teams at the bottom. The Rangers, I've got them finishing with 80 points. That is not going to be anywhere near good enough. The Islanders, I've got them finishing with 86. That is also not going to be good enough. We can X those 2 teams out, as we can X out the Carolina Hurricanes. Right now, they got 71 points. I've only got them finishing with 83, so I've actually got the Islanders passing them in the standings, so we can definitely X out the Carolina Hurricanes. So now, in terms of the number 3 seed in the Metropolitan Division, we'll worry about the wild card teams later on when we finish the Eastern Conference and before we go to the West. We're just looking at the number 3 seed in the Metropolitan Division right now. You've got Philadelphia, Columbus, and New Jersey, all within 3 points of each other. As I had mentioned in the previous video, I've got Philadelphia winning out within this division for the rest of the season, with the exception of the game where they have to go to Pittsburgh and play the Penguins. Maybe the game against Washington in Philadelphia, but Philadelphia's been a pretty good team on home ice this year. I think they're still going to be very desperate at that point in the season to try to catch Washington to try to win the division. So I've got Philadelphia winning that hockey game. And just like we talked about with Columbus and New Jersey, it's even now, if you're not chasing the division, you're just trying to make the playoffs, it's just as damaging to have those losses in regulation versus getting those games to overtime, to the shootout, to get the extra point out of them. I've got Columbus and New Jersey each losing 4 games in regulation for the rest of this season, and I think that's just going to be too many when you've got to try to make up some points. New Jersey does have the game in hand. That is definitely going to help them out, but I still don't think it's going to be enough to try to catch the Flyers to get the number 3 seed, to get a guaranteed playoff spot out of the Metropolitan Division. So what we're going to do, we're going to pencil in the Philadelphia Flyers as the number 3 seed in the Metropolitan Division, which means in the first round of the playoffs, I do have them going to Pittsburgh, Battle of Pennsylvania. Who doesn't want to see that? Pittsburgh, Philadelphia in a 7-game series. That would be a great one. That's the way I've got it going. I got Washington 1, Pittsburgh 2, Philadelphia 3. Now let's pop down to the Atlantic Division, where I think things are basically all but decided at this point. I think there's just too much separation with those teams at the top. We've already said the Tampa Bay Lightning are going to win that division. Boom, we're going to check them in. They're in there as the division champion. The teams that we can effectively eliminate from even talking about them in terms of the playoffs and what they're going to do potentially to try to make the playoffs. Obviously, Buffalo, they are gone. 56 points, not happening. I've got them finishing with 65. Ottawa, they've only got 59 points right now. I've got them with a decent finish to the season, finishing with 72 points. Obviously not going to be anywhere near close enough. Montreal, same boat. They've got 62 points right now. I've got Montreal actually with a fairly strong finish, finishing with 79 points. Not going to be good enough. And the Detroit Red Wings, actually I've got Montreal leapfrogging Detroit in the Atlantic Division standings. Detroit's got 63 points right now. I've only got them finishing with 75. So we're going to also effectively eliminate Detroit. And it's like I said, those teams at the top, I think they've just got a little bit too much separation between them to change too much. You got Boston as the number 2 seed right now in the Atlantic, 94 points, 40 rows. Behind them, you've got Toronto, but they're 87 points, 34 rows, and Boston's got 2 games in hand on them. So I don't see any path for the Toronto Maple Leafs, especially with the schedule they've got left. But I only think they lose one more game outright in regulation for the rest of the season, and that is when they go to Nashville to take on the Predators. I don't see Toronto catching Boston for the number 2 seed in the Atlantic, so we're going to go ahead and we are going to pencil that in. The Boston Bruins finishing second place in the Atlantic Division. Like I said, I've got Tampa Bay finishing with 123 points and 50 rows. I've got Boston finishing, like I said in the previous video, with 112 points and 45 rows. An excellent season for them to be the number 2 seed in the Atlantic. Beyond that, the only question is, can Florida catch Toronto? And the answer to that question is no. Florida's got 2 games in hand. That's great, but they're 12 points back. So that is not going to happen. I got the Toronto Maple Leafs actually finishing over 100 points as well. I got the Leafs finishing with 108 points, which means they're actually going to close the gap on Boston a little bit. Again, Boston's got that really tough Western Conference road trip, but they ultimately don't catch them. Toronto finishes, in my opinion, with 108 points, 40 rows as a very strong number 3 in the Atlantic Division, which means they do have to go to Boston to play the Bruins, a rematch of that heartbreaking 2013 playoff series where Boston came back from 4-1 down on home ice to win that series and move on. So, as far as the Eastern Conference is concerned, the only question left to be answered is, do the Florida Panthers at 75 points right now catch either Columbus or New Jersey to grab one of those 2 wildcard spots in the East? Let's go by the standings right now. Columbus, 79 points, 31 rows. New Jersey, 78 points, 30 rows. Florida, 75 points, but 31 rows. I've got the Columbus Blue Jackets finishing the season with 94 points and 36 rows. It's a pretty good finish to the season. I think they actually lose 3 of their next 4, but after that, I feel like Columbus is going to catch fire. I think they're actually going to lose their season finale in Nashville just because the Predators are an incredibly good and incredibly deep team. But it's a good finish to the season for Columbus. The New Jersey Devils, I have them finishing with 93 points and 34 rows. What that means is that Columbus is in. I've actually got New Jersey losing their next 6 straight games. I've only got 2 of those games where Jersey gets a point. Things are not going to look good for the Devils, but I do think they're going to catch fire towards the end of the season. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 game winning streak towards the end of the year to really climb back up there. The Florida Panthers, with 2 games in hand on New Jersey and 3 games in hand on Columbus, will finish the season with 92 points and 35 rows, which means the Florida Panthers will miss the playoffs by a single point, which means the New Jersey Devils will maintain the wild card 2 spot that they sit in right now, and just barely by the skin of their teeth, the New Jersey Devils and Taylor Hall make the playoffs in the Eastern Conference. So what this means is actually the playoff matchups as they sit right now in the Eastern Conference, I think will ultimately be the first round playoff matchups that we see when the Stanley Cup playoffs begin. New Jersey going to Tampa, Toronto going to Boston, Columbus going to Washington, and Philadelphia going to Pittsburgh. So that's the East. How about the West? Let's start here in the Central Division. We've already established the Nashville Predators as our Central Division champion, so we're going to put them in there right now. Nashville, the number 1 seed out of the Central. Actually, the top team in the Western Conference by way of points. I've got them beating Vegas by 3 points, 121 to 118. And as far as I'm concerned, when you're looking at potentially teams that might make the playoffs, the only team that you can eliminate out of the Central Division right now are the Chicago Blackhawks. They've only got 68 points. I've got them finishing the season with 80. That is a really bad season for the Chicago Blackhawks, who have this pedigree, obviously, of being a playoff team, being Stanley Cup contenders. So we're still looking at the Winnipeg Jets, the Minnesota Wild, the Dallas Stars, the Colorado Avalanche, and the St. Louis Blues in terms of certainly having a shot at finding some postseason. In terms of the number 2 seed in the Central Division, which is important, it's home ice in the first round of the playoffs. It's an important spot to be in. You're looking right now at the Winnipeg Jets. They've got a 7-point cushion over the Minnesota Wild. Nobody has any games in hand, which means they play the same number of games from here on out. Winnipeg with 92 points and 39 rows, and you got the Minnesota Wild with 85 points and 36 rows. Spoilers, I've got both of these teams getting up over the 100-point plateau. I just don't think Minnesota has quite enough time left in the regular season to catch Winnipeg. With a 7-point cushion, the only games that I see Winnipeg losing for the rest of the season straight up in regulation, they've got some road games. They've got to go to Nashville. That's a very difficult game for them. I think the Predators win that game. They have to go to Toronto. That's not an easy place to win. Toronto's going to be fighting. They're going to probably still be in a position where they think they can catch Boston by that point. I've got the Winnipeg Jets finishing the season with 111 points and 45 rows. I've only got Minnesota getting to 101. So we got the Winnipeg Jets. We're going to pencil them in as the number 2 seed out of the Central Division. Now, in terms of the number 3 seed, look, you've got 3 teams here that have 80 points already at this point in the season: Minnesota, Dallas, and Colorado. And then St. Louis is right there with 79. But I don't think, again, there's really not a lot of time left here to make up these point gaps. Now look, Dallas and Minnesota, it's only a 3-point gap right now. I just don't think Dallas is going to have enough time even just to make up that small gap of 3 points. As I mentioned, I've got Minnesota finishing the season with 101 points. I think they lose straight up in Vegas, in Nashville, a home and home with the Stars. That'll likely determine which of these two teams is going to get there. So I think actually they do lose in Dallas. So we're going to pencil in the Minnesota Wild as the number 3 seed out of the Central Division. That means in the first round, Minnesota has to go to Winnipeg to play the Jets. And for the Jets' sake, I do hope Mark Scheifele is healthy and ready to roll there as their number 1 center. That's a very difficult first round matchup. So there we go. We've got Nashville 1, we've got Winnipeg 2, and we've got Minnesota 3. Now, we can't talk about, or we're not going to anyway, talk about the Central Division anymore, but you've still got those 3 teams that are all there vying for a wild card spot. All 3 of those teams have a great chance to still make the playoffs. In our 4th and final division, we're going to go to the Pacific Division, where things are going to be very interesting right down to the wire to the end of this regular season. The only things that we have decided at this point in the Pacific Division are its champion. That's going to be the Vegas Golden Knights. Once again, got them finishing with 118 points. And we can talk about the teams that we're going to eliminate because they've been eliminated, at least up here, for quite a while. We're talking about the Arizona Coyotes. They're obviously in contention for the top pick in the entry draft. They've only got 55 points right now. I've only got them finishing with 61. The Vancouver Canucks, 59 points right now, 25 rows. I've only got them finishing with 67 points. They're going to be right there as well for a lottery pick, so we can definitely eliminate them, as well as the Edmonton Oilers. Too many Canadian teams we're talking about here. Edmonton, 64 points, 26 rows as it stands right now. I've only got them finishing with 73 points. That is not going to be good enough to come even close to sniffing a playoff spot. And this is what makes the Pacific Division so interesting, because the gap between the number 2 seed in the division and missing the playoffs may only be a couple of points. This is a very, very tight division. You've got San Jose with 83 points and 33 rows. You've got Los Angeles with 81 points, but 36 rows. You've got Anaheim with 80 points, but only 30 rows. So again, it's very, drastically different here. And then you've got the Calgary Flames, 78 points, but 32 rows. And the rows really come into play in terms of determining who gets positioning, who makes the playoffs, who does not. They're one of the primary tiebreakers in the standings at the end of the season. Right now, again, you've got San Jose, Los Angeles right now holding down the number 2 and number 3 seeds. So let's start with them. San Jose's got a 2-point cushion right now. Neither team has any games in hand. They play the same number of games for the rest of the regular season. Here's my bold prediction. The Los Angeles Kings, if you look at the standings, are one of the best road teams in hockey. I believe at the time I looked, they were the only road team in the Western Conference that to that point had won 20 games. My bold prediction is this: Los Angeles does not lose another game in regulation this regular season. That's the prediction I'm throwing down. The Los Angeles Kings do not lose another game in regulation for the rest of the season. That said, I've got the Kings losing 4 more games this season, but all of them are going to be in either overtime or in the shootout. I got 3 of those games coming on the road: at Minnesota, at Winnipeg, and at Colorado. Those are 3 games in a row. I think the Kings lose all 3 of those games in a row. I've also got them losing a sneaky game on home ice against Calgary, because Calgary is going to be desperate. They know that they are on the bottom of this pile. There are teams that they need to pass in order to try and make the playoffs, sneak in. But as far as the rest of the games, I've got Los Angeles winning out. The rest of the games, home, on the road, doesn't matter where it is. I've got the Los Angeles Kings finishing with 103 points and 42 rows. The San Jose Sharks, I've also got them winning out for the rest of the regular season, except for a handful of games that come on the road, very much like Los Angeles. I've got San Jose losing in St. Louis, in Nashville, and in Vegas. I've got them losing those games in regulation. Those are 3 straight games coming at the tail end of a 4-game road trip. I don't think San Jose goes into any of those buildings and wins those games because it's still at a point in the season where there's still going to be things to be decided. I've got the San Jose Sharks also finishing with 103 points on the regular season, same amount as Los Angeles, with only 39 ROWs. So what that means is I've got the Los Angeles Kings leapfrogging the San Jose Sharks when it's all said and done in the standings to be the number 2 seed in the Pacific Division, which means they get home ice advantage over the San Jose Sharks in that Pacific Division 2 versus 3 matchup. Nashville, Winnipeg, Minnesota, Vegas, San Jose, Los Angeles, San Jose, in fact. That's 6. Only 2 left. 2 Western Conference playoff positions remaining and 5 teams vying for them. 3 are going to be very unhappy. You've still got the Dallas Stars, the Colorado Avalanche, the St. Louis Blues, the Anaheim Ducks, and the Calgary Flames all competing for the 2 wildcard spots in the Western Conference. As we mentioned, if it ended today, Dallas would get the wildcard 1, and Colorado would get the wildcard 2 by virtue of having more rows than do the Anaheim Ducks. They both got 80 points, but Colorado's got 35 rows, while Anaheim only has 30. So, let's go in order of how it sits right now. Dallas, Colorado, Anaheim, I believe St. Louis, and Calgary. So we'll start with Dallas. 82 points, 34 rows. How does the rest of their regular season go? I've got Dallas finishing the season with 94 points and 36 rows. I think Dallas actually has a bit of a unfriendly schedule for the rest of the season. Starting right now, actually, Dallas has a 5-game road trip, but they have to go to Montreal, Toronto, Ottawa. They come back to play Winnipeg, and then they have to go to Washington. So that's a tough 5-game stretch, all on the road against teams you don't play a ton. I actually think Dallas loses all of those games. I think they get a point out of Ottawa, but I think the Senators come up big with a big game there, beat Dallas on home ice, but Dallas will get a point out of that game. But that's 5 games that, boom, you're going to lose. Any advantage that you might have had is out the window at this point. Now it's really a dogfight for the Dallas Stars. And then later on in the season, towards the end of their schedule, they've got another really tough 3-game road trip. As a matter of fact, they got 4 road games in 5 games. They have to go to Minnesota. They play a home and home, in fact, with Minnesota. But then they have to go to San Jose, to Anaheim, and to the Kings. 2 teams that they are trying to prevent from catching them from getting one of the wildcard spots. That's a really, really tough schedule the rest of the way for the Stars. The Dallas Stars, in my prediction, in my model, will finish with 94 points and 36 ROW. Next team on the list is Colorado. 80 points, 35 ROW. They have got a better looking schedule the rest of the way than do the Dallas Stars. They also have a game in hand. As a matter of fact, Colorado has a game in hand on every other team on this list. They play one more game than all of them. Like Dallas, I don't have Colorado winning another game on the road this season, but I do have them grabbing some pity points. I think they get a pity point out of Minnesota in Minnesota. They get one out of Chicago in Chicago. And in back-to-back games in Anaheim and Los Angeles, I mean, they have other games where they have to go to San Jose and go to Vegas. I think they lose those games outright. But there's some of those road games that it's just so important this time of year to grab that extra point. And I think Colorado's going to be able to do that. I've got the Colorado Avalanche finishing with 98 points and 39 rows. So already, we take our list over here and we move it over here. We've got Colorado with 98. We've got Dallas with 94. Let's pop down now and look at Anaheim, who would have been 3rd place on our list over here. 80 points, 30 ROW. they have a pretty good looking schedule for the rest of their regular season. Matter of fact, of their remaining 12 games, I think they only lose 3 of them. Anaheim's next game is against Vancouver. I honestly think they're going to underestimate Vancouver. I think Vancouver's still playing for pride. I actually like the Canucks to win that hockey game. I do think Anaheim takes a point at the very least. They have to go to Winnipeg. I think they lose that game. Jets are just too good on home ice. And they've got a home date with the Los Angeles Kings. Kings obviously are going to be fighting for that number 2 seed in the division. I think Anaheim loses that game, even though it's in Anaheim. But I also think the Ducks get a point out of it. I only think the Ducks don't get a point out of 1 game remaining on the rest of their season, and that's that game in Winnipeg. I've got the Anaheim Ducks finishing the season with 100 points and 36 ROW. That means if we go over here, Anaheim shoots up into the wild card 1 spot, knocks Colorado down to wild card 2, and eliminates the Dallas Stars. I don't believe Dallas makes the playoffs. So right now our thresholds are 100 points and 98 points. You got to beat 98 points and how many ROWs did we say? 39. 98 and 39. You got to beat 98 and 39 in order to make the playoffs in the Western Conference. Let's start with St. Louis. Right now, 79 points. They've got 34 ROW. Blues have some tough road games to finish out the regular season. They have to go to Columbus, to Vegas, to Colorado, and they have to go to Chicago. And I think that Chicago game is one that you got to circle on your calendar. It's late in the season. Chicago won't have anything to play for but pride. I think Chicago actually catches them in that game. I like the Blackhawks to win that game and win that game in regulation. So boom, for St. Louis, that's 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 4 road regulation losses for the rest of the regular season. They don't have any games in hand. Doesn't spell very good news. I've got the St. Louis Blues finishing with 97 points and 40 ROW, which means the St. Louis Blues, in my model, will not make the postseason. So now it's all up to the Calgary Flames. 78 points, 32 ROW. They need to get to better than 98 points and 39 ROW. First of all, for Calgary, let's look at the games that I think they're definitely going to win. Their next game, they've got Edmonton on home ice. I think they beat the Oilers. They go to Arizona. That's a win for them. Arizona still trying to get that number 1 pick in the lottery. Calgary's going to beat Arizona. They have to go to Los Angeles. At this point in the season, that could be a must-win game on Los Angeles' home ice. I think Calgary's up for the challenge. I think Calgary wins that game. They get the Columbus Blue Jackets on home ice. I think Calgary wins that game. They get Arizona again, this time on their home ice. I think Calgary wins that game. Unfortunately, when I said that they play the Edmonton Oilers at home, they actually play the Edmonton Oilers at home twice. And I think where it's the Battle of Alberta and Edmonton, even though it's a lost season for them, if they know in their minds that they can have something to do with the Calgary Flames missing the playoffs, they're going to do that. I think that second time around, I think the Edmonton Oilers are up to the challenge, and I think Edmonton beats Calgary that second time. Calgary also has a very difficult home remaining on their schedule with the San Jose Sharks, and that is going to be a very difficult challenge for them, with San Jose trying to either hold off or catch back up to the Los Angeles Kings in the battle for home ice in that matchup. I've actually got San Jose winning both of those games. I think Calgary gets a point out of both of them because they're the more desperate team. Calgary's got a tough game where they got to go to Winnipeg. I think they get a point out of it, but I think ultimately they lose that game. Basically, it's a long way of saying I just don't think Calgary's got enough in them. I've got the Flames finishing with 93 points and 35 ROW. That officially eliminates the Calgary Flames from playoff contention. You have the Anaheim Ducks at 100 points and 36 ROW as your wild card 1 team, and the Colorado Avalanche, 98 points, 39 ROW as wild card 2. So, how does that change the Western Conference playoff matchups from what they sit at right now? In the Central Division, there is no change. You got the Nashville Predators playing host to the Wildcard 2 team, which, as we just mentioned, will be the Colorado Avalanche. And the 2 versus 3 matchup in the Central does not change. Winnipeg playing host to the Minnesota Wild. But the Pacific Division, both of those matchups change. The Pacific Division champions still going to be the Vegas Golden Knights, but they are now, instead of having to take on Dallas, are going to have to take on Anaheim as the Wild Card 1 team. And then in the 2 versus 3, you flip home ice. I've got the Los Angeles Kings taking home ice away from San Jose and hosting the Sharks rather than being hosted in the first round. So there you go, folks. That's how I think your first round playoff matchups are going to look. We'll go over them here for you one more time very quickly. And you know what? I wouldn't be a predictor. I wouldn't be a prognosticator if I didn't have an early lean on some of these matchups. So why don't I just go ahead and give you that too? In the Eastern Conference, the Atlantic Division champion, Tampa Bay Lightning, playing host to the Wildcard 2 team, New Jersey Devils. You gotta like Tampa Bay in that series. My initial lean is to go with the Lightning there. And in the 2 versus 3 Atlantic Division matchup, the Boston Bruins playing host to the Toronto Maple Leafs. You know what? If the situation was reversed with home ice, I would be actually pretty tempted to take Toronto in this series. My lean is to Boston. They've been very good on home ice. Toronto, not the greatest thing on ice away from home. So I'm actually going to go Boston in that series. That may be another series that even goes to 7 games, and that may traumatize some Leafs fans. The Metropolitan Division, the champions, the Washington Capitals, playing host to the Columbus Blue Jackets as the Wild Card 1 seed. I think that will be a very good series, but my lean is to the Washington Capitals with home ice advantage. Might go to 7 games, but I like Washington in that series. And then in the Met 2-3 series, again, the Battle of Pennsylvania, the Pittsburgh Penguins playing host to the Philadelphia Flyers. My lean in that one is actually Philadelphia. The Flyers were a really good road team this season. I think they keep that up through the rest of the regular season. Pittsburgh, obviously, very, very good at home. Not a very good road team. I think Philadelphia can win those games in Philly, and between the two teams, Philly's the more likely team to win a game on the road. My lean there is actually on the Philadelphia Flyers to beat Pittsburgh and move on to the second round. And in the West, as we just discussed, the Central Division champion will be the Nashville Predators. They will play host to the Wildcard 2 team, the Colorado Avalanche. That's a series I really, really, really want to see. Nathan MacKinnon up against PK Subban and the Nashville Predators. My lean is to Nashville in that series. I obviously love Nathan MacKinnon, but my lean is towards Nashville in that series to take out Colorado. The Central 2-3 matchup, the Winnipeg Jets and the Minnesota Wild. As we said, that's a really good series. Minnesota is a very tough out. For Winnipeg, it's kind of going to depend on Mark Scheifele's health. I assume he's going to be fine. I'm going to give the lean to the Winnipeg Jets. The Pacific Division champion Vegas Golden Knights, their first playoff experience, obviously, taking on the Anaheim Ducks as a Wild Card 1 team. This doesn't feel to me to be the same Ducks team, but they are steeped in playoff experience. I'm still going to go with Vegas. I think it could be a 7-game series. This could be an incredible playoff series. I think it's hard to bet against the Vegas Golden Knights right now because they've just made a whole season out of proving people wrong. So my initial lean there is to the Vegas Golden Knights. And in the Pacific Division, the 2 versus 3 matchup, again, Los Angeles now having home ice advantage rather than San Jose. I was going to take Los Angeles either way in this series. If San Jose had home ice, LA is one of the best road teams in hockey. So I really like the Los Angeles Kings in that series. That's a great path for the Kings to get through to the Western Conference semifinal. That's my lean. All right, folks, those are your 2018 National Hockey League Stanley Cup Playoff matchup predictions for the first round. But like I mentioned, I've got a little something extra for you. Since I went through and did point and finish predictions for every single team and every remaining game in the NHL schedule, I have my projected 2018 NHL entry draft lottery order. So this would be the order of teams heading into the draft lottery. Obviously, you can't predict what's going to happen with the draft lottery unless you do a mock draft, which that might not be a bad idea. But you can't really predict that at this point, since there's obviously at least a dozen games for every team left in the regular season. So this order is probably going to change. But based on my prediction, this is the way the draft lottery order is going to look. Right at the top, the Arizona Coyotes. I've only got them finishing with 61 points. That puts them as the number 1 seed for the draft lottery, which would mean they would pick no worse than 4th. As a reminder, if teams beneath them would win a lottery spot, obviously Arizona would fall down, means they could pick no worse in the entry draft than 4th place. Number 2 is the Buffalo Sabres. They only had 65 points in my model. That means they could pick no worse than 5th in the entry draft. And number 3 was the Vancouver Canucks. 67 points would mean they pick no worse in the entry draft than number 6. Rounding out the rest of the field, number 4 is Ottawa. Number 5 is Edmonton. Number 6 is Detroit. Number 7 is Montreal, which means they'd pick no worse than 10th. Number 8 is the New York Rangers. Number 9 is Chicago. Number 10 is Carolina. Number 11 is the New York Islanders. And number 12, the Florida Panthers. And 12 is the first team that could potentially fall as far as 15th, because that's the number of teams that are involved in this lottery. It's all the teams that don't make the playoffs have a chance to win the draft lottery and get a top 3 pick. But any team from Florida on down could potentially, there's a situation that exists that means they could fall as low as 15th. Those are the Florida Panthers at number 12, the Calgary Flames at number 13, the Dallas Stars at number 14, and the St. Louis Blues at number 15. All right, folks, that's going to do it. Those are my playoff predictions as far as what the first round matchups are going to be. What do you think the first round matchups are going to be? Who do you like to make the playoffs? Who don't you like to make the playoffs? What do you think the order might be in the draft lottery? Who do you think they might win the draft lottery? Who do you think the winning team in the draft lottery might take first overall? Is it a slam dunk that it's going to be Rasmus Dahlin? Or is it possible that Philip Zadina from the Halifax Mooseheads or one of the other players might jump up and get that number 1 spot? Also, let me know in the comment section below, would you be interested in me doing a mock entry draft? A mock draft for the first round of the NHL entry draft. Is that something that you'd be interested in seeing? Would you like me to do that? Let me know in the comments section below. All right, that was a marathon, but finally feel good, and it feels good to be back doing this. That's it for me, Justin, Bridgewater's Finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter. Enjoy the remainder of the NHL regular season. It is winding down to a close. Playoffs are going to be here before you know it.